Chapter 7. Eloise stood by the grand staircase, her travel bag perched beside her like a loyal subject awaiting orders. The week's whirlwind of public engagements had left her exhilaration mingled with a touch of fatigue. Yet, as the evening cast its purple hue over the palace gardens, a surge of anticipation coursed through her veins at the thought of the impending journey to Allenia with Prince Bernard. "Shall we?" came the deep, resonant voice of Bernard from behind her. He carried himself with an ease that belied his royal stature, though his attire, a crisply tailored suit that managed to flirt with casual elegance, reminded Eloise of the man's obligations. "Absolutely," Eloise replied, her heart skipping a beat as she turned to face him. She noticed the keys to the car he dangled with a playful flick of his wrist. "No driver, then?" "None," he affirmed, a conspiratorial glint in his eye. "I thought it might be refreshing to escape the formalities for a while, just you and me." Eloise smiled, appreciating the gesture. It was a rarity for royals to abandon their chauffeured routines. "It does sound liberating," she said, her voice laced with a mirth that matched his own. Bernard approached her father, who had been overseeing the preparation for their departure, with a protective hawk's gaze. "Sir, I vow on my honor to keep Eloise safe." "You have my word." Her father's stern expression softened into a smile, the lines of responsibility easing around his eyes. "I trust you, Bernard. Take care of each other." With a respectful nod, Bernard scooped up Eloise's bag and led her to the waiting convertible parked at the back of the palace. The car was a sleek machine, its contours shimmering under the fading light, promising a ride as smooth as silk. Eloise settled into the passenger seat, the leather cool against her skin. As Bernard revved the engine to life, a sense of freedom washed over her. They were embarking on a journey not just to another kingdom but toward understanding each other more fully. The car rolled forward, and the palace gates receded into the background. Eloise watched them disappear, feeling a chapter closing and a new one beginning. With the wind tugging playfully at her hair and the open road ahead, she felt the constraints of royalty dissolve, if only for the duration of this drive to Allenia. "Here's to our little adventure," Bernard said, a teasing tone in his voice as he shifted gears smoothly. "An adventure is exactly what I need," Eloise echoed, her laughter mingling with the purr of the engine. They were two royals driving into the promise of shared secrets and whispered dreams. The twilight deepened into a velvet sky as the sleek convertible glided along the serpentine roads toward Allenia. Tucked inside, Eloise felt the world outside blur into a mosaic of dusky hues and twinkling stars. The engine's gentle hum was a lullaby to the day's end, and the soft leather seat cradled her in comfort as she turned toward Prince Bernard. "Tell me," she ventured with a playful lilt to her voice, "what grand visions does His Royal Highness harbor for the future?" A spark ignited in Bernard's eyes. "Ah, where to begin?" he mused, his hand steady on the wheel. "For one, I dream of opening channels between our realms that go beyond mere trade or diplomacy." Eloise listened, enraptured by the earnest fervor that underlaid each word he spoke. Within his words, she recognized a kindred spirit, someone who also bore the weight of responsibility with grace. "You know," she said, "I've always believed that we are more than the sum of our titles. We have the power to sculpt the bedrock of society, to be architects of a world that thrives on compassion and progress." Bernard's gaze found hers in the dim glow of the dashboard lights, holding it for a heartbeat. "Exactly," he affirmed. "We stand on the cusp of a new era, you and I. One where our actions could echo through generations." Their conversation ebbed and flowed like the winding road they traveled, with laughter punctuating the heavier tones of their dialogue. Eloise's earlier apprehension had dissipated, replaced by this ineffable sense of belonging beside Bernard. As the miles passed, Eloise allowed herself to relax fully into the seat, the proximity to Bernard no longer a source of rigid formality, but rather a welcome warmth. She marveled at how natural it all felt, the ease with which she could be herself without the layers of ceremony standing between them. "Comfortable?" Bernard asked, a hint of mischief in his tone. Immensely, she replied, her smile genuine. Your chariot is quite the noble steed. Only the best for Princess Eloise, he teased. And so, they continued under the cloak of night, their journey a shared secret, between two hearts slowly aligning. A prince and princess, not bound by duty or decorum in this fleeting escape, but by the laughter and light that spilled from their candid exchange, forging a bond stronger than the steel of the car that carried them forward. The wind played with the hem of Eloise's dress, an impish dance that only seemed to embolden her resolve. She turned to Bernard, the moonlight casting a soft glow on his attentive face, and took in a deep breath. Bernard, she began, her voice carrying the weight of her conviction over the purr of the engine, I have long dreamed of a society where the barriers that divide us are dismantled. Where every child, regardless of birth or station, has access to all levels of education. Empowerment through knowledge, she continued, that's the legacy I yearn to build. To weave understanding into the very fabric of our nations, it's more than just a dream, it's a necessity. Bernard's lips curved into a smile of genuine admiration. Eloise, your strength is as inspiring as it is humbling. He paused for a moment, letting the sincerity of his words sink in before he added, you speak of legacies, and I find my own aspirations echo yours. I hope to bridge the chasm between Theron and Allenia, which will live in the hearts of our people. She listened, heartened by the shared vision that emerged from the depths of their discourse, a vision painted in strokes of peace and unity. His passion, so akin to her own, was a balm to the skepticism that oftentimes clouded her thoughts. True cooperation, he said, could be our crowning achievement. Not just for our time, but for generations that will look back and see this time as a turning point. Imagine that, Eloise mused, a playful glint in her eye, a prince and a princess, not just performing royal duties, but learning side by side. We might just cause a sensation. Or start a revolution, Bernard quipped, the laughter in his voice mingling with hers. As they drove on through the quiet of the evening, the future felt like a reality taking shape in the here and now, guided by the unity of two hearts set on a common course. Eloise turned her gaze to Bernard, who had relaxed into the driver's seat, his profile etched against the fading light. Did you ever climb trees as a child? She asked, her voice laced with a touch of whimsy. Bernard chuckled, his eyes remaining on the road ahead. Countless times, he confessed. I always fancied myself an intrepid explorer, conquering the mightiest oaks and pines. Ah, then we have more in common than I thought. Eloise smiled, recalling her own escapades. I was quite the climber myself, though it was more about finding a quiet place to read than seeking adventure. Is that so? He glanced at her, his smile broadening. Then perhaps our first diplomatic negotiation should be over which tree to claim as our own. Agreed, she said, laughter dancing in her words. But only if we can install a proper seat between the branches. My days of perching on precarious limbs are behind me. As they exchanged tales of youthful daring and misadventure, Eloise felt the walls she had built around herself, brick by cautious brick, begin to crumble. Of course, not all memories are fond ones, Bernard mused after a pause, his tone softening. There were times when the weight of expectation felt crushing. Eloise leaned closer, drawn by his sudden vulnerability. I know that feeling well, she whispered, her hand brushing against his arm in comfort. To be looked upon not as yourself, but as an emblem, a symbol, it's a heavy mantle to bear. Indeed, he replied, casting her a grateful look. But I suppose it also shapes us, forges us into who we must become. Perhaps, she conceded, but I prefer to think that we also shape the role, not merely fill it. In that moment, as their conversation delved deeper into the recesses of their hearts, Eloise found herself captivated not by Prince Bernard of Allenia, but by Bernard, the man with hopes and fears so akin to her own. Tell me, Bernard said, shifting gears as they ascended a gentle slope, what is your dearest hope for the future? Eloise pondered the question. Love, she said at last. Not just for us, but for everyone under our care. A unity that transcends borders and bloodlines. An admirable dream, he murmured, his admiration evident in the timbre of his voice. As the stars emerged, one by one, to bear witness to the night, Eloise rested her head against Bernard's shoulder, the fabric of his jacket soft against her cheek. A sense of contentment, deep and abiding, flowed through her. "Look," she said softly, pointing upwards to where the constellations twinkled in the heavens. "Our dreams are as limitless as that sky." "Indeed," Bernard agreed, his arm coming to rest around her shoulders. "And together, we'll chart a course among the stars." The wind, playful and impertinent, toyed with a loose strand of Eloise's hair as the convertible swept through the twilight. It danced across her face in a teasing caress that Bernard noticed with tender amusement. His hand reached out, fingers brushing the errant tendril away from her porcelain skin with a touch so gentle it was as if he feared she might shatter. "Thank you," she whispered, the words catching slightly in her. In that fleeting contact, something unspoken passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of the intimacy that had blossomed throughout their journey. As the car glided under the archway of Allenia's palace, its headlights casting long shadows across the cobblestone drive, they both felt the weight of history upon them. The palace's grandeur a testament to centuries of tradition and duty. Yet even within its imposing presence, they found a haven for their burgeoning love. "Here we are," Bernard announced, his voice carrying the pride of one who belonged to this storied place yet was humbled by its magnificence. "Home," Eloise echoed softly, her heart swelling at the thought of the life that awaited them here. Bernard parked the car and turned to face her, his expression earnest and full of hope. "Eloise, I promise to stand by you, to support your dreams, to be your partner in all things." "And I you," Eloise responded, her voice steady, despite the fluttering in her chest. "I believe in us, Bernard, in the good we can do, and the joy we can share." They leaned into each other, their lips meeting in a kiss that was soft as the whisper of silk, lingering like the memory of a perfect day. "Come," Bernard said, offering his hand with a playful flourish that made Eloise giggle. "This is the palace of the sovereign of the land, and though we won't live here, we will visit often." With a nod, Eloise placed her hand in his. Together, they stepped into the palace, and into the future they would forge as one. The hushed corridors of the palace were a stark contrast to the vibrant emotions that danced through Eloise's heart. "Your room is just here," Bernard murmured, guiding her toward a door adorned with intricate carvings that spoke of careful craftsmanship and royal heritage. "Near my cousin's, in case you need anything during the night." "Thank you," Eloise replied, her voice soft yet suffused with warmth. "But I suspect this castle's thick walls will keep even the slightest peep at bay." "True," he chuckled, his laughter a melodious sound that seemed to make the very air around them shimmer with mirth. "These walls have seen centuries of whispers and still kept their counsel." "Then let's hope they'll be kind to our new beginnings," she said, a playful twinkle in her eye as she took in her surroundings with an appreciative gaze. "I'll see you at breakfast," Bernard promised, his hand lingering on the doorknob, reluctant to part ways. "Sleep well, Eloise." "Sweet dreams, Bernard," she returned, her smile feeling like a sunbeam in the dimly lit hallway. With a final glance that held promises of tomorrow, they retreated to their separate rooms, the echo of their footsteps a duet that faded into silence. Asterisk. Morning light spilled through the high windows, casting golden patterns on the breakfast table set for royalty. The scent of fresh pastries mingled with the lively chatter of Bernard's family, who had gathered in a bright, airy room that looked out onto gardens manicured into perfection. "Good morning," Bernard greeted as he entered, his presence commanding yet wholly approachable. "I'd like you all to meet someone very special, Eloise." As Eloise stepped forward, a warm flush bloomed across her cheeks. Her eyes met those of the prince's relatives. Some faces were familiar from official portraits, while others felt like friends she had yet to know. Each carried the unmistakable mark of shared lineage, a tapestry of history and duty woven into their bearing. Charmed, eloquently expressed Princess Annabel, her gaze appraising yet kind. An absolute pleasure, chimed in Prince Frederick, the youngest of King Philip's children. Ah, the famous Eloise, Princess Maria intoned with an air of mock solemnity, before breaking into a genuine, warm grin. We've been looking forward to meeting the woman who has captured our dear cousin's heart. Eloise's laughter, light and unburdened, filled the room as she exchanged pleasantries. Seems we've all known you long before today, Princess Catherine, the heir to the throne, observed. Perhaps it's because Eloise fits right in with us, Bernard suggested, pride evident in his stance as he stood by her side. Or perhaps it's because your stories have preceded you, added Prince Frederick, winking conspiratorially over a sip of his coffee. Only the good ones, I hope, Eloise quipped back, her eyes dancing with laughter. Only the best, Bernard assured her, his hand finding hers under the table, their fingers intertwining as if they had never existed apart. As they settled into the rhythm of familial camaraderie, Eloise knew she was exactly where she was meant to be, in a palace awakening to new possibilities, surrounded by those who would become not just allies, but friends. And at the center of it all was Bernard, her partner in both dream and deed. Eloise trailed her fingers over the ancient ivy that clung to the stone walls of the garden, her other hand securely held by Bernard as they meandered through the hedges. Legend has it, Bernard began, his voice taking on a conspiratorial whisper, that every rose in this garden represents a love story from our past. He plucked a petal, twirling it between his fingers, before letting it flutter to the ground. Then the grounds must be awash with romance, Eloise replied with a soft chuckle, imagining the countless tales each blossom might tell. Indeed, he said, and with a flourish, he whisked her into an unexpected spin, drawing laughter from her lips. Their path led them next to the stables, where the musky aroma of hay and leather mingled under the high rafters. Bernard introduced her to the horses with a tenderness that revealed the gentle nature beneath his princely facade. He spoke their names like old friends, Apollo, Elysium, Orion, and watched with delight as Eloise extended a palm filled with treats. Seems you're quite the horse whisperer, she teased, observing how the animals nuzzled closer to her, drawn by her innate warmth. Or perhaps they're simply charmed by your presence, Bernard countered, a playful glint in his eye. The royal kitchen proved to be their final escapade, a cavernous room where copper pots hung like chimes awaiting the wind. The head chef, absent for the day, had left behind a legacy of aromas that hinted at feasts prepared behind closed doors. They embarked on a comedic attempt to bake a simple loaf of bread, flour puffing into the air like winter's first snow, coating their hair and clothes with a fine dusting. Who knew baking could be such an exhilarating endeavor? Eloise mused. Ah, but the taste of victory will be all the sweeter, Bernard proclaimed, watching the dough rise with a mix of pride and anticipation. Throughout the day, amid the echoes of shared laughter and quiet confidences exchanged, Eloise felt the threads of a bond weaving together, a tapestry of companionship that felt as ancient as the palace itself and as fresh as the gardens in bloom. Hand in hand, they returned to the heart of the palace, their footsteps light, their spirits buoyant with the joy of togetherness. And as the last rays of sunlight cast golden hues across the courtyard, Eloise realized that, in finding Bernard, she had discovered not only a partner but also a kindred spirit who delighted in life's simplest pleasures with as much fervor as she did. Chapter 8. Eloise's heels clicked against the ancient stone floor, a subtle counterpoint to the grand organ filling the vaulted space with sacred harmonies. Bernard, wearing a morning suit that spoke of tradition as much as it did of his impeccable taste, offered her an arm. As she looped her own through it, she felt the gentle squeeze of his fingers, a silent reassurance that transcended the need for words. They walked together down the aisle of the chapel, flanked by centuries-old stained glass that filtered the morning light into a kaleidoscope of colors dappling their path. Bernard's family proceeded with the same composed elegance, the king and queen exuding a benevolence that was almost tangible, while his cousin's laughter whispered like a sotto voce accompaniment to the service about to unfold. The sermon was a tapestry of ancient texts and contemporary wisdom, woven seamlessly by the archbishop. Eloise listened, occasionally sneaking glances at Bernard, who bore the weight of royal duties with a grace that made it look as though he were born to stand at the pulpit himself. A wry smile tugged at the corner of her mouth when she caught him stifling a yawn. As the final hymn soared and the benediction settled upon the congregation like a royal mantle, Bernard's family greeted fellow parishioners with the ease of long practice. Lunch was a grand affair, not due to the opulence of the setting. They dined in a modest family room within the palace, but because of the company and conversation. The king recounted tales of state visits that had everyone chuckling over their chicken and roasted vegetables. "Remember the time father mistook the ambassador's wife for the gardener?" Frederick quipped, nearly choking on his water as the memory sent ripples of laughter around the table. "Ah, horticultural diplomacy," Bernard added with a twinkle in his eye, "a thorny issue indeed." Eloise laughed along, feeling like she was already a part of this family. Their laughter mingled with the clinking of fine china and the soft shuffle of servants discreetly clearing dishes, the moment as comfortable as a beloved book whose pages never yellowed with time. Asterisk. The gravel crunched beneath the tires of the gleaming vintage car as Bernard maneuvered with effortless grace along the winding path. Eloise sat beside him, appreciating his skills as a driver. She looked all around as pieces of manicured lawns and grand estates lined the road. "Where are we off to?" she inquired, her voice laced with a playful curiosity. "Somewhere special," Bernard replied, the corners of his mouth hinting at a secret mirth. "A locale steeped in sentimental history." Eloise's gaze took in the scenery as the car slowed to a halt beside a charming gazebo, its white lattice entwined with climbing roses. Bernard got out of the car and ran around it to open the door for Eloise. "See there?" Bernard gestured toward the gazebo. "That's where my father proposed to my mother. It was their sanctuary." "Truly?" Eloise's fingers traced the delicate blooms, imagining the scene. "Yes." Bernard's voice softened. He often said it was here that he found the courage to shape a future with her, a future that eventually led to, well, to this moment with you. Bernard watched her. "I've always believed that the best parts of our past can illuminate the path to our future," he mused. "Then let us hope," Eloise quipped, her eyes twinkling, "that your father was not standing in a bed of nettles when he knelt. It would be quite the prickly precedent to follow." His laughter rang out, clear and bright, mingling with hers. Bernard extended his hand, a silent invitation for Eloise to sit beside him on the gazebo's ornate bench. She obliged, enjoying sitting close beside him. It felt right. How had she never realized Bernard was a man who could make her happy? "Your father chose well," she murmured. "Yes, he did," Bernard agreed, his voice laced with a gravity that drew her eyes back to him. There, beneath the intricate lattice of the gazebo, Bernard lowered himself to one knee. From within his jacket, he produced a small, velvet box, a relic of timeless promise, and Eloise's breath caught in her throat. "Eloise," he began, his voice steady despite the tremors in his hands, "the love that blossomed here years ago between my parents has guided me to this very day." He opened the box to reveal a ring, its stones catching the sun's rays. "Will you honor me, not just with your hand, but with your heart, your laughter, and your indomitable spirit? Will you marry me?" Eloise's eyes danced over the ring, then met Bernard's expectant gaze. So many emotions were rushing through her. "Yes," she whispered, a word as simple as it was profound. "1,000 times, yes." The bench bore witness to their union as they embraced. Their kiss was a seal of their engagement, a union that would hopefully stop all the unrest between their countries. In the seclusion of the gazebo, Eloise and Bernard shared laughter and whispers. The late afternoon sun cast a golden hue over the palace as Bernard's car swept through the wrought iron gates. Eloise's heart felt buoyant, her hand fluttering to the diamond nestled against her collarbone, a physical reminder of the promise just made beneath the ancient gazebo. Bernard caught her gesture and his smile widened with unabashed delight. "Ready to share our news?" he quipped, the playful lilt in his voice echoing the mirth dancing in his eyes. "Only if you're prepared for an outpouring of royal excitement," she teased back, her spirits soaring as they alighted from the vehicle, hand in hand. As they entered the grand foyer, the sound of their footsteps on the marble floor was swallowed by the vastness of the space. But it wasn't long before their presence caught the attention of Bernard's family. "Everyone," Bernard announced, "we have splendid news." His aunt and uncle, the king and queen, rose like twin monarchs of old, anticipation etched into their regal bearing. The courtiers and staff, sensing the gravity of the moment, inched closer, their expressions a tapestry of curiosity and eagerness. Eloise felt a flutter in her chest. With a flourish, Bernard presented her left hand, the ring glinting, a silent herald of their commitment. "Your blessing would complete our happiness," Bernard declared. A collective gasp rippled through the room, followed swiftly by exclamations of delight. The king stepped forward, his usually stoic face softened by a genuine smile, and enveloped them both in a bare hug that managed to convey his approval and affection without the need for a single word. "That's brilliant, my boy," the king boomed, his eyes twinkling with pride. "And Eloise, welcome to our family." Laughter filled the room, light and effervescent, as the queen, with tears glistening in her eyes like morning dew, took Eloise's hands in hers and whispered heartfelt congratulations. "Now, we go to Theron and break the news there," Bernard said. With their belongings hastily packed and farewells warmly given, Bernard and Eloise embarked on the journey back to Theron. Asterisk. "Mother, father," Eloise began, "I have agreed to be Bernard's wife." Her parents had expressions of unbridled joy. Her mother clasped her hands over her mouth, while her father blinked rapidly, his usual composure gone. "Engaged? Truly?" her mother exclaimed, rushing forward to enfold Eloise in an embrace that conveyed volumes of maternal love and excitement. "Bernard, you've rendered us speechless," her father said, extending a firm handshake. "Welcome to the family, officially." The palace erupted into jubilation, servants and nobles alike sharing in the infectious happiness that seemed to permeate every stone of the palace. Eloise and Bernard stood at the heart of it all, their laughter mingling with the chorus of congratulations. Later, Eloise swept into the sunlit drawing room, where Queen Beatrice along with Eloise's sisters-in-law, Amanda and Nicole, were already gathered around an antique mahogany table. "Darling, come see these peonies," Queen Beatrice enthused. "Wouldn't they be perfect lining the aisle?" "Exquisite," Eloise agreed, leaning in to admire the blooms, their soft petals the embodiment of romance. She traced her finger over the image, imagining the chapel decorated with them. "Only the finest for our Eloise," Amanda chimed in, her voice melodious and warm. She slid a binder brimming with designs across the polished wood toward Eloise. "Now, dresses. We must consider silhouettes that complement you." Nicole nodded sagely. "And time is of the essence. A month is but a whisper in the wind when it comes to royal nuptials." "I know it seems fast, but it will be good for Theron as well as me," Eloise murmured. But the challenge in the women's eyes steeled her resolve. After hours of turning pages, swapping stories, and weaving dreams into plans, Eloise excused herself, stepping out into the cool embrace of the palace garden. There, she found Bernard pacing before a statue of an ancient queen. "Plotting a coup against wedding nerves, are we?" Eloise teased. Bernard stopped mid-pace, his gaze lifting to meet hers with a sheepish grin. "Am I so transparent?" "Even a prince can quake before the might of matrimonial commitment," Eloise quipped. "Ah, but it's not the commitment that daunts me," he confessed, his laughter mingling with hers as he took her hands in his. "It's wanting everything to be perfect for you, for us." Perfection lies in imperfection, she whispered, drawing him close. As long as we stand together, what more could we possibly need? Eloise's laughter faded, her eyes lingering on Bernard's face as he stepped closer. She could feel the heat of him, a magnetic pull that drew her nearer still. Victory is sweetest when shared, she teased, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, reveling in the strength beneath her touch. Shared, he echoed the word, his hand settling on her waist, drawing her against him. Yes, every triumph, every challenge, shared. Their lips met, a light kiss, to begin with. The kiss deepened, passion flaring between them like the first blush of dawn. Bernard's embrace tightened, and Eloise melted into him, her heart racing. As they finally parted, breathless and yearning, Eloise felt the whisper of a smile grace her lips. Bernard's eyes searched hers, a question poised in the depths of his gaze. "Good night, my prince," she said, the formal address playfully at odds with the lingering heat of their kiss. "Good night, my princess," he responded. Chapter 9. Princess Eloise glided into the opulent hall, where throngs of eager journalists awaited. She stood in front of the reporters with Prince Bernard at her side. They were the picture of regal grace, a vision that had graced the front pages of the morning's papers. "Princess Eloise, congratulations on your engagement," a reporter called out. The question, like the first drop in a downpour, opened the floodgates, and soon a deluge of questions was coming at them. "Thank you," she beamed, her smile radiant. "We are both thrilled to share our joy with the nation and beyond." "Prince Bernard, how did you propose?" another voice chimed from the crowd. Eloise turned to Bernard with a tilt of her head, an unspoken invitation for him to take the lead. She watched with a mixture of admiration and amusement as he fielded the question. "Ah," Bernard said, "it involved a private setting and perhaps the most nerve-wracking moment of my life." His confession elicited a chorus of chuckles and scribbling pens. "Princess, how are you preparing for the wedding?" "Any nerves?" asked another. "Preparations are well underway," Eloise replied, her laughter tinkling like delicate chimes. "As for nerves, I believe we are both too excited to feel anything else." "Aren't we, Bernard?" "Absolutely," he agreed. The royal limousine glided across the cobblestone streets. Inside the vehicle's plush confines, Princess Eloise rested her head against the cool leather, her gaze slipping past the window to watch the city blur by. "Bernard," she began, her voice a soft melody that filled the space between them, "I can't express how grateful I am for your support today. Handling the press can be quite the joust at times." Prince Bernard chuckled. "I must admit, fencing with words is less perilous than actual combat, but I dare say it requires similar finesse," he replied. "Yes," Eloise smiled. "You parried their questions with the grace of a seasoned knight." "Ah, but it was your radiance that disarmed them completely," he countered, his lips curving into a teasing smile as he captured her hand, bringing it to his lips. As the palace gates came into view, Eloise felt a flutter of anticipation for the evening's festivities. They were to be celebrated in a manner befitting their royal status, yet she found herself cherishing the simplicity of this moment alone with Bernard. Asterisk. The sun began its descent, casting the skies in hues of gold and crimson, an apt backdrop for the evening's formal dinner. The palace's grand ballroom had been transformed into an enclave of elegance, tables adorned with crystal and silver. "Shall we?" Bernard asked, extending his arm as they stood at the entrance of the ballroom. His eyes held a spark of excitement, the energy palpable and contagious. "Absolutely," Eloise agreed, placing her hand upon his arm. Together, they stepped into the ballroom, the buzz of conversation crescendoing into applause as the guests acknowledged the royal couple. Throughout the dinner, laughter mingled with the clinking of fine china, and toasts were raised like banners on a battlefield, each one a declaration of happiness and well wishes. "May I say, my dear, you are even more captivating under the glow of 100 candles," Bernard murmured, a playful twinkle in his eye as he leaned closer to Eloise. Flattery will get you everywhere, Your Highness, Eloise quipped back, her cheeks warming with a blush. Then I shall have to be insufferably flattering, he promised. As the final course was served and the music swelled, Princess Eloise knew that this night would be etched in memory, a prelude to a lifetime of shared smiles and tender jests. As she sat by Prince Bernard's side, the laughter of their guests wrapping around them like a regal cloak, she couldn't help but feel that their love story was only just beginning. The evening's festivities had faded to a hushed echo as Princess Eloise led Prince Bernard by hand into the solitude of her library. Your collection is truly impressive, Bernard remarked. Ah, but do you judge a book by its cover, or the story within? Eloise teased. By the company it keeps, he replied smoothly, his gaze settling upon her with warmth. They settled onto an overstuffed sofa, nestled between towering shelves. With a shared smile, each picked up a volume from the small table beside them, and a comfortable silence enveloped the room. Yet even as they read, their hands found each other, fingers entwining. As time slipped away unnoticed, the glow from the fire seemed to grow more intimate, and the distance between them lessened. The pages lay forgotten as Bernard turned toward Eloise. He leaned closer, tilting her chin upward with a tender touch, and their lips met in a kiss that was both an exploration and a homecoming. The world outside the library walls could have crumbled to dust and neither would have stirred. But as the intensity of the kiss deepened, a sliver of restraint threaded through Eloise's desire. She pulled back just enough to search Bernard's eyes with her own, a hint of vulnerability flickering there. Bernard, she whispered, there's something I must tell you. He nodded, his thumb brushing her cheek with the softness of a petal. I wish to wait until our wedding night, she confessed, her cheeks blooming with a delicate flush. I hope. Say no more, Bernard assured her, silencing her with another gentle kiss pressed to her forehead. I understand. Relief washed over Eloise. Bernard's affirmation warmed Eloise, yet as they parted from their latest kiss, a sizzling imprint of lips that told a tale of restraint and yearning, his sigh was as heavy as the velvet curtains draping the tall windows of the library. Eloise, he began, his voice a husky note that danced with mirth despite the gravity of his confession. Agreeing to wait is something I will happily do, but I must admit, waiting for you has become the sweetest torment I've ever known. Eloise's laugh filled the room. She placed a hand on his chest, feeling the steadiness of his heart beneath her palm. Perhaps it would be prudent, then, she suggested, arching an eyebrow playfully, to suggest your return to Allenia? The distance might ensure we won't give in to temptation. The corners of Bernard's mouth twitched into a smile. His gaze locked with hers. Your logic is sound, he conceded. Yet the very idea of distance from you seems a more formidable trial than the tempest of desires we navigate. Bernard's fingers trailed over the spines of ancient tomes as he paced the length of Eloise's library. His face betrayed a flicker of reluctance. Eloise, he began, halting his march to stand before her, the mere thought of leaving your side is painful. But, my schedule demands I return to Allenia after the coming weekend. Eloise, reclining in her favorite chaise, with a novel resting unattended in her lap, looked up at him. The corners of her lips curled into a smile that belied the tightness in her chest. Bernard, she said, how I wish we could simply elope and satisfy our heart's urging. Yet, we are tasked with orchestrating a wedding befitting royalty. She gestured to the stack of bridal magazines and planners that had taken siege upon the mahogany coffee table. The timeline is as tight as it can possibly be already. I know, Bernard chuckled. He took a seat beside her, ensnaring her hand with his own. Yet, time has never dared to defy us. Eloise squeezed his hand. Every second hastens our union, she mused. And every tick of the clock is closer to the beginning of our future together. Bernard's lips met Eloise's with urgency. Eloise felt the world recede until there was nothing but the two of them, a prince and his betrothed. His hands cupped her face with a tenderness that belied the intensity of his feelings. "Time may separate us," he murmured against her lips. "But it will be hard to be away from you." Laughter escaped her. "I hope we can continue to see each other at least on weekends," she replied. "I think my weekends are free," he conceded. "Then I hope to see you on them." "We'll be parted for a little more than 3 weeks before the wedding on June 1st. "Ah," he sighed, "we will do video chats every day." She nestled into the crook of his arm, feeling the solid certainty of his presence. "That will help to appease me, but I shall miss your touch, your kisses," Eloise declared. Bernard pressed his lips to her forehead. "Then we'll have to make certain to kiss as much as we can while we're together." He lowered his head and kissed her passionately, making memories for them both to look back on. Chapter 10. Princess Eloise stood before an ornate mirror. Her mother, Queen Beatrice, fussed over Eloise's veil. "Mother, you'll smother the life out of this veil if you keep at it," Eloise teased, her eyes twinkling with mirth in the reflection they shared. Queen Beatrice chuckled, her hands pausing their adjustments. "Eloise, on this day of all days, perfection is not a request, but a requirement." "Perfection," Eloise mused, "doesn't seem like the right thing for marriage, does it?" She turned to face her mother, catching the glint of pride in the Queen's eyes. "Perhaps," Queen Beatrice conceded, "but it's a companion well suited for my daughter's wedding day." With a final approving nod, the Queen stepped back, allowing Eloise a moment of solitude with her reflection. The princess took a deep breath, her nerves steadying under the weight of her wedding dress. It was time. The heralds trumpeted, announcing the departure of royalty, as the horse-drawn carriage awaited its precious cargo. Eloise, with a practiced grace belying her inner excitement, descended the palace steps where her carriage gleamed like a jewel under the sun's approving gaze. Once settled amidst the velvet cushions, the carriage lurched forward, pulled by steeds whose hooves clattered rhythmically against the cobblestone. The capital unfolded before them, its streets lined with citizens whose cheers and applause rose like a wave set to crest upon the shores of the church steps. "Listen to them," Eloise said, looking from side to side as the open carriage passed through the streets. "They sound almost as happy as I feel." "Yes, they do," Queen Beatrice agreed, her voice laced with affection. "You have captivated their hearts just as surely as you've captured Bernard's." Laughter bubbled up from the onlookers as the carriage wove through the thoroughfares, children scampering close enough to toss petals that danced in the air before settling upon the cobblestones. A group of local bakers, aprons dusted with flour, waved loaves of bread shaped like hearts in a whimsical display of blessing for the marital union. "Look at those," Eloise pointed. "Bernard would approve. He has quite an affinity for pastries." "Then he shall fit right into our family," the Queen replied with a chuckle. "But let us hope his love for sweets does not overshadow his love for exercise." "Or his feelings for me," added Eloise, realizing he'd never told her he loved her, or she him. But she was still certain their marriage would be a good one. "Impossible," her mother assured her, patting her hand with gentle certainty. As the church spires came into view, Eloise felt the carriage slow, and the thrum of her pulse quickened in tandem with the slowing hooves. Today she would become a wife and forever a partner to the prince awaiting her at the altar. With a deep breath and a smile bright enough to rival the midday sun, Princess Eloise readied herself to step into the next chapter of her royal romance. Asterisk. Bernard stood at the altar, his heart thrumming a regal march that only he could hear. He desperately wanted to pace, but there were too many people watching him. The church, awash in the golden glow of 1,000 candles, held its breath for the arrival of Princess Eloise. The murmur of the congregation faded into hushed tones as the first notes of the bridal chorus cascaded from the organ loft. Then she appeared. As the doors opened, revealing Eloise in her bridal splendor, Bernard's nerves unraveled in an instant. A smile, unbidden and radiant, spread across his features. He watched her, eyes alight with the mirth that was shared between them in quieter moments. "Look at Bernard," someone whispered from the pews. "He looks like he's won the kingdom's largest treasure." "Indeed," another replied, "and he has." Eloise approached, her gaze locked with his, a silent conversation of shared secrets passing between them. As they stood together at the altar, the world outside the stained glass and stone walls fell away. "Your Royal Highnesses," intoned the Archbishop, his voice echoing through the vaulted church. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of two devoted hearts." "Bernard," Eloise began when it was her turn, her voice clear as a bell, "I vow to be your partner in all things, not just as a princess, but as your friend, your confidant, and your greatest ally. I promise to cherish our laughter, to seek joy in our journey, and to share pastries with you in bed, even if crumbs become our nightly companions." A titter of amusement rippled through the guests, and Bernard's chest swelled with warmth. He adored her wit, the way her humor glinted like the diamond tiara upon her brow. "And I," Bernard returned, his tone steady and sincere, "vow to honor and respect you, Eloise. To support not just your duties, but your dreams. To keep pace on morning rides, to listen with intent when the world feels heavy, and to sneak those extra pastries onto your plate when you think no one is looking." Laughter echoed again, this time accompanied by a few sentimental sighs from the assembly. The Archbishop smiled benevolently, the ceremonial book in his hands almost superfluous to the genuine pledges they exchanged. "By the power vested in me," he pronounced, once the vows were solemnly spoken and rings tenderly exchanged, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." And as Bernard lifted Eloise's veil, the look they shared carried the promise of every dawn to come, bright, hopeful, and filled with the sweet anticipation of shared tomorrows. The bells of St. Michael's Cathedral pealed with jubilant fervor, their resonant chimes heralding the union just forged within its ancient walls. Princess Eloise emerged beside her new husband, Prince Bernard, their hands clasping as they descended the church steps. Their exit was swift, a shared eagerness propelling them forward, while petals cascaded from above, showered by the hands of well-wishers. "Kiss! Kiss!" The crowd's chant swelled into an insistent harmony, a playful demand for the newlyweds to seal their nuptials before all. Bernard turned to Eloise, and without a moment's hesitation, he obliged the people, drawing her close. Their lips met in a tender, yet exuberant display, eliciting cheers that echoed through the capital's main thoroughfare. As the couple broke away, their laughter mingled with the joyous uproar. They made their way to the awaiting carriage. The horse-drawn conveyance, resplendent with white roses and ribbons, stood ready to escort them to the next chapter of the celebration. Eloise waved to the people lining the streets, her heart brimming with gratitude for the sea of faces that blurred past. Within the grand ballroom of the palace, chandeliers cast a golden glow over the opulent scene. King Philip and Queen Rachel stood regally among the assembly, their presence commanding yet warm, as they welcomed guests with practiced grace. The laughter of Eloise's brothers punctuated the air, their wives' elegant gowns swishing softly as they moved through the throng of nobility. Queen Beatrice, the epitome of poise, greeted dignitaries with a serene smile, her eyes occasionally seeking out her daughter amidst the revelry. Eloise, ever the embodiment of her lineage, navigated the reception with a diplomat's ease, her hand still firmly held by Bernard, whose own face betrayed the pride of a man who had won the heart of not just a princess, but the people she cherished. Together, they floated through their first hours as husband and wife, their laughter the truest testament to the love they celebrated that day. "May I steal you for a dance, my wife?" Bernard whispered, leaning close enough for his breath to tease the wisps of hair by her ear. "Only if you promise not to step on my toes," Eloise teased back. "Never," he assured her with a grin, leading her toward the dance floor where they would soon sway as one, under the watchful gaze of the kingdom. Bernard extended his hand with a flourish, drawing Eloise into the center of the grand ballroom. The orchestra dipped into the opening bars of a waltz. She placed her hand in his, and they stepped into the dance. Laughter bubbled up from her throat. The couples encircling them faded into a blur of colors and lights, leaving Eloise acutely aware of the man whose eyes never wavered from hers. As the final note resonated through the hall, applause cascaded around them, but Eloise could only see Bernard. "Shall we mingle?" she suggested, still buoyant from their dance. "Lead the way, my princess," Bernard replied, his use of the title both a jest and a promise of what was to come. They navigated the sea of guests, their hands clasped, a silent symbol of solidarity. They paused to exchange pleasantries with someone from Allenia, whose mustache twitched with delight as he recounted tales of statecraft that seemed to have originated in another age. "Your wisdom is truly unparalleled, Duke Gregory," Eloise complimented, her tone genuine even as she suppressed a smile at Bernard's subtle eye roll, his patience for long-winded anecdotes being as short as ever. "Princess Eloise, your graciousness knows no bounds," the Duke responded, bowing so low his nose nearly brushed his metal-adorned chest. "Come now, uncle," Bernard chimed in, his charm seamless as he steered the conversation away from politics. "Tell us about the roses in your garden this year. I hear they're quite extraordinary." "Ah, a subject most dear," the Duke exclaimed, and Eloise couldn't help but admire Bernard's deft handling of the old man. They continued their rounds, laughter their constant companion as they engaged barons and bishops alike. Bernard's wit was a gentle rapier, parrying any stiffness out of the room, while Eloise's warmth acted as the sun that coaxed smiles from even the most reserved courtiers. "Your Highnesses, may your lives together be as filled with joy as this evening," toasted a duchess, her glass raised in tribute. "Thank you, Duchess Catherine," Eloise responded. "We hope to serve and inspire as much as we are served and inspired by everyone." "Indeed," Bernard added, raising his glass. "And perhaps with a touch less formality, if you'll forgive the occasional slip from protocol." Amidst the throng, Princess Eloise and Prince Bernard shared a look, their private promise glistening brighter than any crystal overhead. With a nod almost imperceptible to the merry onlookers, they signaled each other, it was time. "Shall we?" Bernard whispered. "Yes," Eloise replied, the corners of her lips curving with mischief and mirth. She was more than ready for their wedding night. Hand in hand, they made their way through the crowd. Chuckles and cheers swelled around them like a rising tide as the assembly realized the couple's intent. "Long live the newlyweds," a baron shouted. "May your love flourish like the kingdom's endless fields," a countess called out. "Remember, not too many heirs at once," quipped a viscount. "Try to save some champagne for us common folk." Eloise felt warmth bloom in her chest, a sunburst of joy ignited by the affectionate revelry. She squeezed Bernard's hand. "Thank you all, truly," Bernard managed to say over the din, his grin as wide as the palace gates. "Your blessings are more valuable than gold." With a final wave, they crossed the threshold of the great doors, leaving behind the echoes of their friends and family chanting their names. Finally, Eloise said. "Definitely," Bernard agreed, his eyes alight with anticipation. "The stars have conspired to grant us this moment." As they strolled through the moonlit corridors of the palace, the portraits of ancestors seemed to nod in approval. "Your room or mine?" Bernard teased. "Whichever is closer," Eloise retorted, her laughter mingling with his, a duet that needed no audience. They reached the doors to Eloise's chambers, the heavy oak carved with the intricate crests of her lineage. Bernard leaned close, his breath a warm caress against her ear. "May I carry you over the threshold?" he asked. "Only if you vow not to drop me," Eloise answered, her tone laced with feigned severity. "Perish the thought," he proclaimed, lifting her effortlessly. "For tonight, we write the first chapter of our forever." As the door closed behind them, the world outside faded into insignificance, leaving only the whisper of silk, the clasp of hands, and two hearts eager to beat as one. Chapter 11. Bernard's fingers, gentle as the touch of a master painter, traced the delicate embroidery of Eloise's wedding gown. Eloise, her heart aflutter like a captive bird yearning for the skies, watched him with eyes wide and shimmering with unshed tears of joy and trepidation. "I'm nervous," she admitted softly. "We can always wait if that's what you want," Bernard whispered, his voice a tender caress against the weight of silence that filled the room. "Nervous doesn't mean I don't want to make love with you," she replied, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions within her. With a reverence befitting the sanctity of their union, Bernard eased the gown from her shoulders. Eloise's breath hitched. What if he didn't like how she looked when she wasn't wearing multiple layers of clothes? "Beautiful," he murmured. Laughter, light and unbidden, danced upon Eloise's lips as Bernard endeavored to untangle the mystery of the laces and hooks that guarded her modesty. His brow furrowed with concentration, humor glinting in his eyes as he met her amused gaze. "Who would have thought," he quipped, "that the greatest challenge of my life would not be affairs of state but the intricate defenses of my wife's attire?" Eloise giggled, the sound echoing like a sweet melody through the chamber, as much a part of their wedding night as the vows they had exchanged. "Patience, my prince," she teased. "For every knot undone, a secret revealed." Time passed unnoticed, marked only by the soft whispers of fabric falling away and the rhythmic breathing shared between two souls entwined. The world outside their door ceased to exist, leaving only Bernard and Eloise, discovering each other in the most intimate of dances. As dawn approached, cloaked in the subtle hues of daybreak, servants arrived, silent as shadows, bearing trays laden with sustenance. The couple, ensconced within the sanctuary of silken sheets, welcomed the interruption only for the briefest of moments. They feasted not on the fare before them but on the company they kept, nourished by laughter and whispered dreams. Eloise marveled at how natural it felt, this seclusion with him. The outside world, with its expectations and protocols, could wait. Now was for them, for whispered promises and the sacred exploration of newfound unity. Each meal, delivered by servants, became an extension of their connection, a celebration of the love that had transformed a stately bedroom into an Eden of their very own making. Asterisk. Eloise traced the intricate brocade of the bedspread, her fingertip meandering as if to memorize the pattern, while Bernard watched her. "Bernard," Eloise began, her voice a soft melody that danced upon the stillness of the room, "we cannot remain ensconced within these walls forever, much as I cherish the notion." "Ah, yes," Bernard replied with a chuckle that rumbled from deep within his chest. "The people of Allenia might start to believe I have been kidnapped and forced into a life of servitude if we wait too long." Eloise's laugh joined his, light and airy, yet beneath it was the weight of duty that now bound them both. "Yes, we need to be mindful of our roles as royalty. Even if we don't want to." "Speaking of which," Bernard said, shifting to prop himself on one elbow, the linen sheets caressing his skin as he moved, "I have spoken with my aunt, the Queen. She has graciously offered us one of the Crown's properties in the countryside. A beautiful manor surrounded by verdant woods and serene lakes. We could spend our first fortnight there as husband and wife, before our official duties beckon us." 2 weeks? Eloise queried, the prospect igniting a sparkle in her eyes. "A honeymoon, secluded amidst nature's splendor sounds divine. But when should we depart for this idyllic retreat?" "Whenever you wish," he said, tracing the curve of her cheek with the back of his fingers. "We can leave immediately or linger here for a while. The choice is yours." "Perhaps one more night wrapped in the cocoon of pleasure," she mused, nestling closer to him. "Then, with the morning's light, we shall embark on this new chapter." "Agreed," Bernard declared with a kiss upon her forehead, sealing their plan with the tenderness of his lips. "To Allenia we will go, but only after relishing the dawn of our lives together in this private Eden we have created." Asterisk. Bernard's laughter, a warm baritone melody, filled the chamber as Eloise attempted to fold herself into the grand wardrobe. It was a light-hearted jest, a playful rebellion against their inevitable departure. "Eloise," Bernard chided with an indulgent smile, "I fear you may wrinkle your gowns." "Perhaps," Eloise replied, emerging with a mock pout. Her attempt at humor was met by his appreciative chuckle, one that dispelled the lingering nerves of new matrimony. He drew her into his arms. Yet I find myself eager for the future, our future. After these 2 weeks of blissful seclusion, we shall reside in the Crown's manor by the sea. Have you ever seen it? The way the sunlight dances upon the waves is quite enchanting. It sounds wonderful, she mused. A sanctuary for us, where each tide brings the promise of our shared purpose. Indeed, Bernard agreed, his voice tinged with pride. Our roles as working royals come with responsibilities. Engagements to speak, charities to champion. Speaking engagements, Eloise echoed thoughtfully. Standing before throngs, voicing our passions and pursuits, I confess, it daunts me. Ah, but your eloquence is matched only by your compassion, he assured her. You will inspire as you have inspired me. Eloise nodded, a newfound resolve fortifying her spirit. She would get through speaking engagements in Allenia, the same as she had in Theron. Asterisk. Eloise glanced at the silver tray arrayed with an assortment of delicacies, the candlelight casting a soft glow over the exquisite spread. She reached for a plump strawberry. With a playful glint in her eye, she held it up for Bernard to see. Might I tempt you with this morsel? She teased. Bernard leaned back against the mountain of pillows, his shirt unbuttoned, revealing his sculpted chest. A mischievous smile tugged at his lips as he watched her approach. Only if you promise it's as sweet as you. With the grace of a doe stepping through an enchanted forest, Eloise perched on the edge of the bed and extended her arm, the strawberry pinched deftly between her fingers. As Bernard opened his mouth, she hesitated for a mere heartbeat before placing the fruit onto his tongue, her fingertips grazing his lips. He took her wrist gently, guiding her hand away, his eyes never leaving hers. Delectable, he murmured, but whether he spoke of the fruit or the moment was ambiguous. Without another word, the supper was forgotten. They found themselves entwined in a dance as old as time, their bodies moving together in a symphony of passion. Asterisk. Morning sun trickled through the sheer curtains, casting a warm embrace over the slumbering couple. Eloise stirred, her lashes fluttering open to the dawning day, and there beside her lay Bernard, his chest rising and falling in the peaceful rhythm of sleep. A tender smile graced her lips as she brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. Good morning, she whispered, her voice soft as the silken sheets that enveloped them. Is it morning already? Bernard's voice rumbled. His eyes opened slowly, focusing on her. Yes, and we have a breakfast to attend. Eloise rose. Hand in hand, they descended the grand staircase to join her family in the dining hall. The room hummed with the quiet symphony of morning, a clinking spoon here, a rustling newspaper there. They took their seats amid the familiar faces, all smiles and morning pleasantries. Mother, father, Eloise began, her voice steady as she reached for Bernard's hand under the table. We've decided to leave for Allenia tomorrow morning. A chorus of understanding nods greeted her announcement. They spoke of logistics and travel arrangements, but beneath the practicalities swirled an undercurrent of emotion. For now, though, laughter peppered the conversation, and jests were passed as easily as the butter dish. The future loomed large and bright, but today, they basked in the comfort of familial warmth, savoring the final shared moments before the journey onward. The breakfast concluded with a procession of empty dishes and a silent summons from Queen Beatrice's eyes. Eloise excused herself, her feet carrying her with the grace of court training to the sun-drenched drawing room where her mother awaited. Eloise, the Queen began, I have to ask, how do you fare? Truly? Eloise, taking her seat on a plush chaise longue opposite her mother, felt the warmth of sunlight streaming through the tall windows. She sensed the weight of the question, yet her heart was light. Mother, I am so happy, she replied, the corners of her lips curving into a smile. Bernard is everything noble and kind. Wonderful, Queen Beatrice said, her keen eyes softening as they took in the genuine elation etched upon her daughter's face. And the knights? Are they accommodating? The queen's eyebrow arched in a manner that danced between decorum and mirth. More than accommodating, mother, Eloise answered, a rosy blush painting her cheeks. Ah, then my heart rests easy. The queen's laughter tinkled like fine crystal. Just ensure that amidst your explorations, you both remember to emerge for air and royal duties. Of course, mother. Eloise's giggle escaped before she could catch it, as light and airy as the bubbles in a glass of champagne. We shall not forget the world beyond our door. With their intimate exchange concluded, the time for parting drew near. Eloise found herself enveloped in the arms of her family. Her father's hug was sturdy. Her siblings clung with playful sorrow, teasing her about who would now bear the brunt of their mischief. Promise you'll write, her mother implored, her eyes shimmering pools threatening to spill over. Every week, Eloise vowed, the knot in her throat tightening. And you'll visit soon. Allenia is but a journey away. Her goodbye to the queen was last, a moment suspended in time, a portrait of love's tender resilience. Queen Beatrice held her daughter at arm's length, examining her. Go forth, the queen whispered, her voice quivering like a note held too long. Take joy with you, and find it again in your life with Bernard. Eloise fought the tide of tears, feeling them breach her lashes, despite her best efforts. With a final kiss to her mother's cheek, she stepped back. Goodbye, Theron, she murmured, allowing herself one sweeping glance at the tapestry of her upbringing. Hello, tomorrow. Chapter 12. Eloise laughed as she attempted to keep pace with Bernard, who moved with effortless grace. The newlyweds were exploring the vast expanse of their temporary sanctuary, a tradition of royal honeymoons, yet they imbued it with a freshness that seemed to cleanse the grounds. Look there, Bernard pointed toward an ornate gazebo adorned with climbing roses, their petals a riot of crimson and pink. That's where my great-grandparents danced under the stars, whispering sweet nothings into the wee hours of the morning. Sweet nothings? Eloise raised an eyebrow playfully. Is that what we're calling your great-grandfather's legendary love poems now? Ah, but words are mere shadows when compared to action, Bernard replied with a roguish wink, his arm snaking around her waist to draw her close. Their days unfolded like the pages of a fairy tale book, each one filled with a blend of leisure and passion. They would wake late, share a sumptuous meal prepared by the estate's cook, and then wander or while away the hours in shared pursuits. One such pursuit found them hunched over a grand table in the sunroom, meticulously assembling a 1,000-piece puzzle, an image of the estate itself. Bernard's strategic mind worked to sort edge pieces, while Eloise's artistic eye sought out patterns and colors. Their hands occasionally brushed, sending jolts of electricity that sparked laughter and playful teasing. Another piece in place, Eloise declared triumphantly, snapping a section of sky into the emerging picture. We're getting there, Bernard agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. But let us not forget the other pleasures that require less patience. His suggestive tone was matched by the twinkle in his eyes, and soon the puzzle lay forgotten, as more immediate desires took precedence. Afternoons were for reading, lounging by the shores of the lake with volumes of poetry and prose. Yet books often lay abandoned on the grass, as the call of the water proved irresistible. Swimming in the lake became a daily delight, the coolness of the water contrasting with the warmth of their sun-kissed skin. Eloise felt like she was a mermaid, the water buoying her as Bernard playfully chased her, splashing and laughing like carefree children. Race you to the other side, Eloise said, pushing off from the muddy bank. Your competitive streak knows no bounds, Bernard called after her, admiring her spirit as he followed suit. They also rode horses, galloping across the fields with the wind tangling their hair, the sense of freedom intoxicating. And it was during one such ride that Bernard decided to teach Eloise archery. Steady your hand, anchor your feet, Bernard instructed as Eloise positioned herself with the bow, her concentration etched on her face. Now, breathe and release. The arrow whistled through the air, missing the target but earning an encouraging smile from Bernard. You'll have it in no time. You've already captured me. How much harder can a bullseye be? Given that you are much larger than the target, I'd say significantly, Eloise quipped. Touché, Bernard laughed, thoroughly enchanted by her wit, even more so when the next arrow struck the outer ring of the target. Progress! Eloise exclaimed, receiving a celebratory kiss from her husband. Each day they learned more about each other, weaving their lives together with joy and humor, building a foundation as strong and intricate as the puzzle they pieced together in the sun-drenched room. Asterisk. The late afternoon sun cast a warm golden hue over the sprawling gardens of their new residence as Eloise and Bernard crossed the threshold of another royal estate, marking the end of their honeymoon. The servants had lined up to welcome them, a testament to the meticulous organization that ran in the veins of the royal household, but there was an unspoken melancholy that hung in the air, shared by the newlyweds. "Welcome home, your highnesses," the head housekeeper intoned with a deep curtsy, her eyes glinting with pride. "Thank you, Mrs. Danvers," Eloise responded, offering a gracious smile. "Quite the stately abode," Bernard murmured into her ear, his breath tickling her lobe and pulling forth an involuntary giggle. "Though I dare say it lacks the intimacy of our lakeside retreat." "It does," she replied, her gaze lingering on the vast expanse of the entrance hall, that somehow seemed too grand for just two souls. "I shall miss our morning swims, and the puzzle we left unfinished. Our lives are the greatest puzzle, and together we'll piece it day by day," he quipped. Eloise nodded. "We will. Even though you sound like a corny old man when you say that." "Hey! I'm only corny with you." Upon entering their private chambers, Eloise brushed her fingers across the drapes. Bernard watched her, his thoughts momentarily veiled behind a pensive brow. "I must confess," he began, his voice carrying a gravity that drew her attention immediately, "the conclusion of our honeymoon heralds more than a change of scenery. There is unrest still lurking within Allenia's borders, and it requires my energy, perhaps now more than ever." A flicker of concern passed through Eloise's features, her lips parting slightly as if to voice the worry that had taken residence in her heart since their wedding. Yet, she remained poised, the very picture of composure that her new role demanded. "Then we'll handle it," she said firmly. Bernard approached her, the intensity in his cerulean eyes softening. He cupped her cheek tenderly, his thumb caressing her skin with a touch that promised both comfort and alliance. "Yes, we will," he replied. "Together, we are unstoppable." And in that moment, with the setting sun painting them in hues of fading light, Eloise felt the truth of his words. Together, they would navigate the complexities of royalty, the whispers of discontent, and the myriad puzzles life would present them. "Come," Bernard said gently, guiding her toward the bay window that overlooked the rose garden, "let us watch the sunset. Tomorrow's challenges will wait for us, but tonight, we can do what we want." Eloise nestled into his embrace, her spirits buoyed by his presence, as they stood in silent reverence for the beauty before them and the shared journey ahead. Eloise stood on the dais, her palms slightly moist, despite the cool air that wafted through the high windows of the orphanage's grand hall. The children before her were a patchwork quilt of eager eyes and scruffy uniforms, but beyond them, in the shadows where the adults lingered, she caught snippets of less inviting expressions. "Each of you is a story waiting to unfurl," she began, her voice clear. "And in this place, you are given the pen to sketch your future." Her gaze swept over the children, each nod or smile bolstering her confidence. The speech continued. Eloise's tone remained steady even as she sensed the undercurrent of disapproval from certain corners of the room. She spoke of unity and new beginnings, yet the whispers at the back carried a different tale, one of skepticism, a reluctance to embrace the change she represented. After concluding her address amid polite applause, Eloise navigated the sea of small bodies, pausing to exchange pleasantries, to marvel at drawings, to laugh at the unabashed questions only children dared to ask. Asterisk. Evening found her alone in the vast expanse of her new chamber, the echoes of the day heavy in her heart. Bernard had been occupied with matters of state, and the distance of their first day apart clung to her like a shroud. "Bernard," Eloise whispered when he finally entered, his silhouette framed by the doorway as if he were both arriving from and receding into a world where she felt increasingly out of place. "I fear the people of Allenia do not take kindly to me." She watched his face, searching for the light-hearted quip she hoped would dispel her doubt, but she found none. He closed the space between them. "Eloise, it is no easy feat for a nation to open its heart to someone new," Bernard said, his voice low and soothing like a balm. "But they will see in you what I have always seen, a princess, full of grace and fire. Together, we shall win them over, one skeptical heart at a time." Eloise allowed herself a small smile, finding solace in his unwavering belief. "One heart at a time," she echoed. Bernard reached for her hand. Eloise marveled at how his presence alone could transform the cavernous room into an intimate cocoon. Eloise found herself wrapped in his embrace, the strength in his arms offering a silent promise to shield her from the chill of disapproval that had settled in her bones. "Ah, but perhaps we should conduct a thorough investigation to ensure your charms remain potent?" Bernard teased as he led her toward the grand bed, its covers turned down in anticipation of their nightly reprieve. "An investigation?" she quipped. "And what shall be our methodology, Your Highness?" "Empirical evidence, my dear," he replied as he pressed her gently onto the silk sheets. "We shall test the hypothesis with repeated experimentation." Eloise's heart fluttered. He leaned over her, the heat of his breath grazing her skin, igniting a fire that promised to consume all doubts. "Let us begin," he whispered against her lips, before sealing their pact with a kiss that was both an end and a beginning. As they moved together in a rhythm as ancient as time, each whisper and caress was a wordless vow. Within the sanctity of their chamber, they found a refuge from the world. They lingered in the afterglow, the tapestries on the walls standing sentinel to their joy. In Bernard's arms, Eloise felt the stirrings of courage, the courage to face a kingdom with her head held high and her heart fortified by the love of her prince. Let them doubt, she thought, as sleep began to claim her, nestled securely against the man who was both her husband and her champion. "For in this chamber, we speak a language all our own."